Do not pray for me. It is useless. I'm in hell. This wasn't a message from a murderer, a tyrant, or a heretic. It was a letter, they said, from a young nun. A woman everyone believed was in heaven. In 1937, her friends mourned her passing, certain of her sanctity. But one of them received a message, a detailed and terrifying testimony from beyond the grave. A warning so potent, a Catholic bishop approved its publication. What could a devout nun have done to deserve eternal damnation? The answer is far more unsettling than you can imagine, because her sins are shockingly common. Her name, as it was published, was Claraara. She had spent years in a convent, known for her piety and devotion. To the outside world, and even to her sisters in the order, she was a model of faith. She followed the rules. She attended the sacraments. She performed her duties without complaint. Her life was a quiet rhythm of prayer and work. When she died young after a brief illness, there was sadness, but also a sense of peace. A soul like Claraara's, everyone thought, was surely and swiftly carried into the arms of God. They celebrated her life, remembering her gentle nature and her dedication. They prayed for her, as is custom, but more out of tradition than necessity. They were certain she was already interceding for them from paradise. They were tragically mistaken. The message came to one of Claraara's closest friends, a sister who had known her for years. It wasn't a dream or a vague feeling. It was a direct, intelligent communication, a full confession, dictated from the abyss. The document, later titled A Warning from the Beyond, begins with that chilling command to cease all prayers. It then lays out, in methodical and excruciating detail, the reality of her damnation. The friend was horrified, gripped by a crisis of faith. How could this be? It had to be a trick, a demonic deception. And yet, the message contained details, theological insights, and a psychological depth that felt terrifyingly authentic. She took it to her spiritual director, a seasoned priest, who also found himself shaken to his core. This wasn't the rambling of a mad spirit. It was a coherent, structured, and deeply disturbing testimony. So what was her great sin? The letter explains it wasn't one single, monstrous act. It was 1,000 small ones. A slow, creeping death of the soul. Claraara confesses she was lukewarm. She did everything that was required of her, but her heart wasn't in it. Prayer became a routine, a box to be checked. Communion, the central act of her faith, became a mere habit. She writes, "I often went to communion out of custom. I did not live from one day to the next, from one communion to the other, while her body was in the chapel. Her mind was elsewhere. She entertained worldly thoughts, daydreams of a life she had left behind. She became attached to vanity, to the small pleasures of praise and the comfort of her routine. She wasn't an evil person in the way we typically think. She was simply indifferent. And, in the economy of salvation, the letter argues, indifference is a fatal poison." The letter describes hell not as a place of pitchforks and cartoon devils, but as a state of being, beginning with the torment of the intellect. She explains that in the moment of death, she saw her life with perfect, horrifying clarity. She saw every grace she was offered by God, every opportunity for love she rejected, every small prompting of conscience she ignored. And she understood. with an agony that eclipses all physical pain, what she had lost. Heaven, the vision of God, an eternity of love. In hell, this memory does not fade. It is the constant, unending soundtrack to her suffering. She is forced to eternally contemplate the good she freely chose to discard. This isn't forgetfulness. It's a perfect, torturous remembrance. The mind, the very thing that was supposed to lead her to God, becomes her primary instrument of torture. If the mind is tortured by what it has lost, the will is tortured by what it has become. Claraara writes that the damned are permanently fixed in a state of hatred. They hate God, not because they believe He is unjust, but because He is the source of the goodness they can never have. They see His perfection, and it burns them. This hatred is not a passive emotion. It is a violent, active, and utterly powerless rage. They are, as she puts it, the walking dead of a will that is evil. They hate the saints. They hate the angels, and they especially hate each other. Hell is a society of pure, unadulterated selfishness. Every soul is locked in its own prison of ego, despising every other soul it encounters. There is no camaraderie in suffering here. There is only isolation, suspicion, and an eternal, gnawing hatred for all that is good. The letter doesn't shy away from the traditional image of fire, but it describes it with theological precision. It is not a fire that consumes or destroys, because there is nothing left to destroy. It is a fire, she says, that is part of God's justice. It affects the soul in a way analogous to how earthly fire affects the body. It is a constant, agonizing sensation of being burned from the inside out. But alongside the fire, there is darkness, a profound, spiritual darkness, the utter absence of God, who is light. This isn't just the lack of physical light. It's the lack of hope, the lack of love, the lack of meaning. It is a crushing weight, an eternal, solitary confinement, where the only thing you can perceive is your own pain and the malevolent presence of others who share your misery. Perhaps the most chilling warning in the letter targets a specific modern belief. Claraara confesses that she fell into the sin of presumption. She thought to herself, Jesus is so good. He won't let a soul be lost. A mortal sin is not so serious. She relied not on God's mercy, but on a distorted, cheap version of it. She treated grace like an entitlement. She believed that, because she was a nun, because she performed her duties, she had a safety net. She could afford to be lukewarm because, in the end, God's goodness would simply overlook her faults. The letter screams that this is a lie from the pit of hell itself. It argues that God's mercy is a gift to be accepted and acted upon, not a license to be complacent. To presume upon His mercy is to insult His justice. It is to take His infinite love and treat it as a trivial thing. And for that, the letter says, the price is absolute. Hell is not empty. Claraara describes the constant, horrifying presence of the fallen angels. The demons. Their torment is part of her own. They were the ones who tempted her in life, whispering the lies she chose to believe. Now, in damnation, they mock her for her foolishness. They remind her of every grace she rejected. They are not rulers of hell in the popular sense. They are prisoners, just like the human souls. But their eternal occupation is to inflict misery, to accuse, and to amplify the despair of those around them. She writes that the damned are tormented by the very demons who were their allies on earth. The pride she indulged in, The vanity she entertained, these now have faces, and they are the faces of her eternal jailers. It is an eternity of being trapped with your worst influences, who now reveal their true, monstrous nature. What makes hell truly hell? One word: forever. The letter emphasizes this point relentlessly. Every torment, the memory, the hatred, the fire, the darkness, is amplified to infinity by the certain knowledge that it will never, ever end. There is no hope. Hope is a function of time, a belief that the future can be different from the present. In hell, there is no future. There is only an eternal, unchanging. Now Clara explains that this realization is perhaps the most crushing weight of all. On earth, even the worst suffering is tempered by the knowledge that it will eventually cease, if only in death. But in damnation, death has already happened. There is no escape. The soul is locked into its final choice, and the consequences of that choice will echo for a duration that the human mind cannot comprehend. It is the full stop at the end of the sentence of life. This brings us to a critical question. If this is a private revelation, why take it seriously? Why would a bishop of the Catholic Church give his imprimatur his official permission for this terrifying document to be printed and distributed? The reason is that the message, however harsh, was considered theologically sound. It contradicted no established doctrine. In fact, it powerfully affirmed traditional teachings on sin, judgment, and hell. The bishop and the priests who examined it did not see it as a definitive statement that a specific nun named Claraara was in hell. They saw it as a powerful, allegorical warning, a wake-up call to a world growing increasingly complacent and secular. It was published not to scare people into faith, but to shock them out of apathy. It was meant to remind the faithful that choices have consequences, that spiritual lukewarmness is a real danger, and that salvation is something to be actively pursued, not passively assumed. Naturally, the letter has faced intense scrutiny and skepticism since it first appeared. Critics point out that we only have the word of one nun who claimed to have received this message. There is no independent verification. Psychologists might suggest it could be a projection of the receiving nun's own fears and anxieties about her faith, a manifestation of religious scrupulosity. Others argue that the depiction of hell is too perfectly aligned with a specific brand of Catholic theology to be a raw, supernatural testimony. They see it as a pious work of fiction, a scared straight pamphlet designed to enforce religious discipline. And in our modern, secular age, the very concept of hell is, for many, a relic of a primitive, fear-based religion. The idea that a loving God would create a place of eternal torment is seen as a monstrous contradiction. On the other hand, defenders of the letter's authenticity argue that its theological depth is a point in its favor. The descriptions of the torment of the intellect and will are far more sophisticated than a simple fire and brimstone story. They align closely with the philosophical writings of saints like Thomas Aquinas. The psychological insights into lukewarmness, vanity, and presumption are sharp and perennial. The argument is this: could an ordinary nun in the 1,930 seconds simply invent a document with such complex theological and psychological consistency? Furthermore, the purpose of the letter is not to condemn, but to warn. It is a desperate plea for the living to take their faith seriously. Supporters would say that this aligns perfectly with the purpose of private revelation in the Church, not to add new doctrine, but to call people back to the gospel message in a powerful and timely way. One of the most crucial parts of the letter is the description of the final judgment. Clara explains that in the moment of death, the soul is given one last, full understanding of its life, and a final choice. God does not send anyone to hell. The soul, faced with the perfect, holy, all-consuming love of God, makes its own choice. A soul that has spent its life turning away from God, embracing selfishness and sin, finds the presence of divine love to be unbearable. It is a searing light that exposes all of its ugliness. In that final, definitive moment, the soul that has oriented itself away from God freely chooses to flee from His presence. It chooses the darkness. Hell, in this interpretation, is not a punishment inflicted, but a destiny chosen. It is the ultimate, eternal quarantine of a soul that has made itself incompatible with love. Whether you believe the letter is a literal message from the damned or a powerful piece of religious fiction, its warning remains deeply relevant. Clara's sins were not murder, theft, or blasphemy. They were the vanilla sins of the modern world: apathy, indifference, vanity, and taking grace for granted. She lived a life that was good on the surface, but hollow underneath. The letter forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. How often do we go through the motions in our own lives, in our relationships, in our beliefs? How often do we choose the comfort of distraction over the challenge of genuine engagement? The terror of Clara's story isn't that she was a great sinner, but that she wasn't. She was ordinary. And the letter suggests that the path to damnation is not a steep, sudden drop, but a long, gentle slope, paved with good intentions and spiritual laziness. In the end, the letter from hell is not really about Clara. It's about us. It holds up a dark mirror and forces us to examine the state of our own souls. It strips away the comforting excuses and the convenient rationalizations. It reminds us that every moment is a choice, and these choices are weaving the fabric of our eternal destiny. The letter ends as it began, with a stark finality. A soul has made its final, irrevocable choice. But for us, the living, the choice is still present. The story serves as a brutal, terrifying, and perhaps necessary reminder that the opposite of love is not hate. It's indifference. And that faith is not a title you hold, but a life you live, moment by moment. The most terrifying question the letter leaves us with is not whether a nun could go to hell, but whether we are living in a way that ensures we won't. What did you find most disturbing about this message? Let me know in the comments below. And if you found this exploration thought-provoking, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the mysteries of faith and history.